bank, but you got to call now, 888-376-9692. You can also make that contribution online, see a photo of the power bank as well as all of our other thank you gifts by going to wnyc.org.
Just to reiterate the top headlines of the pledge drive, tomorrow is the last day of the fundraiser. And today, right now, we've got a $50,000 challenge on the table from Craig Newmark, who will chip in that extra $50,000 if we can get 3,000 listeners by the end of the day tomorrow. We are looking at you right now. Please, if you can, make that pledge at wnyc.org. Thank you so very much for your support. We really appreciate it.
WNYC is supported by the New York Historical Society. Now on view, Lost New York, exploring the places that once defined the city. Friday evenings are pay-as-you-wish admission with live music and Lost cocktails. More at nyhistory.org.
If you believe democracy requires a free press, your station is WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by Bitwarden, the password manager used by millions that is committed to making digital lives less complicated with secure login across all accounts and across all devices. Available to download at bitwarden.com.
A bit of corporate news you can use today, and then we'll go flying. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Viking, exploring the world in comfort. With a fleet of small ships, Viking offers travel experiences for the thinking person. Discover more at Viking.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Risdal. It is Wednesday today, the 22nd of May. Good as always to have you along, everybody. I ask, as a way to get going today, and with honestly only a little bit of hyperbole, what do you suppose you would get if you went looking for the corporate earnings equivalent of the monthly jobs report, the consumer price index, and gross domestic product all rolled into one? My pick, personally, would be the first quarter profit report we got from the AI chip company NVIDIA after the bell this afternoon. $26 billion in revenue in the first 3 months of the year. $26 billion in revenue in 3 months. Last year in Q1, a mere $7 billion. NVIDIA shares have doubled in less than a year. It's worth more than $2 trillion and is estimated to control more than 90% of the market for high-end artificial intelligence computer chips. And with numbers like that, as Marketplace's Megan McCarty-Carino reports, you can bet there are competitors eyeing a piece of that pie.
NVIDIA's path to superstardom in the AI economy started with a happy accident. The company designs graphics processing units, or GPUs, which were intended to process graphics.
For a long time, these chips were mostly used in computer gaming.
Chris Miller is author of Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. He says GPUs can run multiple calculations at once instead of in a sequence.
And it turned out that that same set of calculations were useful in training and deploying AI systems.
So NVIDIA leadership leaned into that first mover advantage, says Daniel Newman, a tech analyst with Futurum Group.
See, NVIDIA doesn't just have a vision of saying, let's sell lots of GPUs. NVIDIA has a vision of owning an AI factory or a stack.
The company has created a whole ecosystem geared to AI, from networking technology to software.
They've basically shortcut the whole process.
That's why it's tough for competitors to catch up, says Dan Ives, an analyst at Wedbush Securities.
It's LeBron James playing one-on-one against a bunch of kindergartners.
Though some rivals are also making impressive plays. AMD and Intel now have processors to rival the performance of NVIDIA's. Amazon, Microsoft, and Alphabet are making their own. Google's latest Gemini model was trained entirely on a proprietary AI processor.
Down the road, this is going to be a AI arms race, a Game of Thrones.
But for now, Ives says those same big tech companies are still shelling out billions to buy up NVIDIA chips. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino for Marketplace.
Continuing on the corporate beat today, Target reported first quarter earnings today, and they were, and I'm sorry in advance for this, I just couldn't not. They were off target. Same-store sales, that's a key category, down 3.7% from last year, more than analysts had been guessing, made all the more troubling by the fact that A, consumer spending is still pretty strong, and B, some of Target's competitors, Walmart among them, are actually doing better than they were this time last year. Marketplace's Kaylee Wells has that one.
There are a couple factors at play here. One, says Columbia University economics professor Brett House, is that retailers
are probably seeing the end of that extra spending that was supported by those pandemic-induced savings cushions.
Target is one of those retailers, relying on middle and working class consumers whose savings accounts ballooned during the pandemic.
And those extra saving cushions are largely gone.
The other factor, now that the pandemic emergency ended, we've been spending our money differently.
Perhaps everybody has the yoga pants they need.
Shiraz Mian is director of research at Zacks Investment Research. He says when we were stuck at home, we stocked up on clothes and electronics and toys, the discretionary items that we wanted rather than needed. Now,
there has been a trend with consumers in the post-COVID period going more for services and experiential spending categories.
And they're shifting more of their budgets to food and consumables.
Arun Sundaram is a senior equity research analyst at CFRA Research. He says when it comes to things we have to buy, Target is losing out to its main competitors, especially Walmart.
Food and beverage only accounts for about 20% of Target's annual sales, whereas for Walmart, grocery accounts for 60% of Walmart's U.S. sales.
Target expects sales to remain flat or increase slightly this quarter. Sundaram says the company should do even better next quarter because Target really shines during back-to-school season. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
Wall Street for the midweek session today, underwhelming. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. If you've paid any attention at all to the Federal Reserve over the past couple of years, you know Chair Powell and the gang are all about the data as they try to figure out where interest rates ought to be. Right now, of course, the big focus is inflation data, personal consumption expenditures, CPI and PPI too. But the Fed is not the only place that eagerly awaits those data drops every month. Companies do too. And the run of higher than expected inflation data so far this year is playing a big role when companies decide to borrow money. Marketplace's Justin Ho has more on the corporate bond decision matrix.
Figuring out when exactly to issue a bond is a pretty big deal for companies. Drew Pascarella, who teaches finance at Cornell University, says a lot of big companies have entire teams dedicated to it.
One of the areas that they're focused on is a calendar of these major news events that potentially would be market moving.
That's because after a big piece of economic data comes out, like really hot inflation numbers or a really weak jobs report, traders can panic and start buying or selling government bonds. And that causes yields on all types of bonds to jump around.
That's risky. So rather than gamble, a more conservative company would choose the rate that's available to them before the news comes out.
Inflation reports this year have been pretty volatile and hard to predict. But Pascarella says that hasn't always been the case. In times when the economy was boring and predictable, like before the pandemic?
The focus on economic data would be less intense because the potential range of outcomes from that data would be, less volatile.
And the kind of economic data companies focus on changes depending on the economy.
Throughout my career, there have been various times when certain pieces of data mattered.
That's Guy Labat, chief fixed income strategist at Janney Montgomery Scott. He says in the early 2000s, for instance, bond markets focused a lot on manufacturing data. Then, in the early stages of the financial crisis, the monthly jobs reports got a lot of attention, especially after one particularly bad report in September 2007. Labat says investors had thought things were improving.
And as it turned out, that was actually the early stages of a substantial downturn in economic activity.
Surprises like that can also cause demand for bonds to fall.
A company is not going to come to markets with a new bond deal unless they feel reasonably confident that that bond deal is going to go pretty well.
That's Winnie Caesar, head of strategy at Credit Sites. She says the stakes are high this year because companies are trying to issue a lot of debt. That's because they know investors want to pile money into bonds, since they're offering pretty decent interest rates right now.
People are thinking this might be my last chance to buy corporate bonds at 5.5%. Maybe in a year from now, they'll only be at 4.5%.
Caesar says companies will probably issue a lot of bonds this year, and they probably won't need to focus as much on inflation reports if prices continue to cool off more predictably.
Then I think that is reaffirming to the market that we don't have an economy that is reaccelerating or overheating, and that Fed policy of restrictiveness is actually working.
As that happens, Caesar says companies might go back to timing their bond sales around jobs reports and other government data, the way they did before the pandemic, when inflation wasn't an issue. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
Let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's off 201 points today. That is 0.5%, 39,671. The NASDAQ off 31 points, 0.2%, 16,801. The S&P 500 dipped 14 points, about 0.3%, 53.7 there. Megan McCarty-Carino was telling us about chipmaker NVIDIA and all of the competitors who are scrambling to keep up. NVIDIA down about 0.5% the day before that earnings announcement came out, 5% after the bell last time I checked to the upside. Intel shed 1%. Advanced Micro Devices, better known as AMD, gained about 0.5%. Qualcomm lifted 1% today. Bond prices down. Yield on the 10-year T-note rose to 4.42%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace Numbers is supported by GitLab, the AI-powered DevSecOps platform. GitLab, software faster. Marketplace is supported by Amazon Business, helping provide a smarter, easier way to get the supplies businesses need to thrive. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying. And by Crowley, a logistics, energy, and maritime solutions company serving commercial and government sectors with nearly 135 years of innovation, a commitment to sustainability, and an ambition to carry the world forward. Learn more at Crowley.com.
New to WNYC? You may have noticed something. None of our shows are trying to sell you anything. Not mattresses or cars, not energy supplements or political ads. So we don't have the needs of advertisers driving what we cover in the news. But it does mean we come to you directly to fund the station. Your individual support, pooled together with other listeners, makes up the core of our funding. So new listener, now is the moment we come to you to ask for your help to fund the news and shows you've now come to rely on. I won't say time is running out, so act fast. You won't want to miss it. But I will say it's important to sustaining this service that you become a sustaining member. You'll be glad you did. Here's how.
Here's how. Call 888-376-9692. You can also go online to WNYC.org and click on Donate. Tomorrow is the last day of this pledge drive here at WNYC. We are closing this thing down. And honestly, the pledge drive is going to end regardless of whether or not we get to the goal that we sent out for this pledge drive. But if we get to where we want to go, which is 3,000 more contributions between now and the end of the day tomorrow, it will unlock an additional $50,000 from Craig Newmark of Craigslist. You know Craig Newmark. $50,000 from Craig Newmark if we can get 3,000 more contributions between now and the end of the day tomorrow. 888-376-9692. You can also go online to WNYC.org and click on Donate. The fact of the matter is, we're not behind a paywall here. There's no subscription fee. There's no costs that we can raise for you to pay for the rising costs that it takes to do this work. But that matters. What it means is that we rely on you that much more to make that voluntary contribution. We are turning up the heat now, turning up the pressure, because we are entering the home stretch of this pledge drive. 888-376-9692 or WNYC.org.
You know, it seems fair to talk about our business model during a show called Marketplace, but it may not be one you'd expect, and it's why we do these on-air pledge drives. It is that listener support, voluntary contributions from listeners are the single largest source of our funding. That is the biggest piece of our income that keeps us here for you. It keeps Marketplace on the air for you and for the entire community. Your support does it. That's why we do these on-air fundraisers, to reach new listeners and hopefully make the case to make that contribution. 888-376-WNYC, 888-376-9692. Pledge online at WNYC.org. Do whatever you can just so you can say, yep, I'm checking the box for WNYC. You can also put a check in the mail for WNYC at the same time. Tomorrow, as Sean said, is the last day of our spring fundraiser. Thank you so much for bearing with us as we do this critically important work of raising the funds that keeps WNYC here for you and for the entire community. Please do your part right now. Don't wait another moment. 888-376-9692, 888-376-WNYC or WNYC.org.
WNYC is independent public radio, free to all. But it's not free to operate. For-profit media can raise subscription fees and put important news behind a paywall. But WNYC doesn't have fees or paywalls. We rely on something more powerful, you. You come to WNYC for the news and stories you value, and because you value it, you choose to support it. If you're not a member yet, now is the time to join. And if you're already a member, thank you. Please consider increasing your gift to help us meet our rising costs. Help us deliver commercial-free, nonprofit public radio to all of New York. Here's how.
Call 888-376-9692. You can also go online to WNYC.org. This pledge drive ends tomorrow. If we can get 3,000 more individual contributions between now and the end of the day tomorrow, Craig Newmark of Craigslist will give us an additional $50,000. Please do not let us miss out on that. Call now if you've been listening all week and you've been hearing the pledge drive and you haven't yet given. 888-376-9692 or WNYC.org. And thanks.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. BNPL is the Marketplace initialism of the day today. Buy now, pay later. Companies offering that particular financial service have long marketed themselves as different than traditional credit cards, a more accessible and sometimes interest-free alternative. Soon, though, BNPL is going to be regulated in some of the same ways as traditional plastic. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau announced new rules today that will oblige pay-later companies. Afterpay and Klarna are two you might have heard of. It'll oblige them to investigate when consumers dispute a charge and also to issue refunds for returned products, along with periodic billing statements. Marketplace's Savannah Marr has more now on what that means for the booming BNPL industry and its customers.
Many of buy now, pay later's repeat customers are financially vulnerable to begin with, says Nadine Chabrier with the Center for Responsible Lending.
Users tend to be younger. They tend to be Black, Latino, consumers of color.
She says many have lower annual incomes and a high risk of becoming overextended. And the CFPB's rules are the first real attempt to protect those borrowers, says Cliff Robb, a professor of consumer science at the University of Wisconsin.
It's adding a little bit more structure to what's been a pretty loosely regulated space,
where consumers sometimes get stuck paying off loans even after receiving a faulty product or returning one to the retailer. But the new standards won't make waves in most of the buy now, pay later industry.
Not at all. The big players already have these practices in place for the most part.
Instead, analyst Claire Tassin with Morning Consult says they send companies like Affirm and Afterpay a message
that the CFPB is going to treat them the same as credit card providers going forward.
Probably including tighter regulations down the road, like requiring these platforms to vet borrowers more thoroughly to make sure they can pay back their loans.
I actually think that benefits BNPL lenders.
Chi-Chi Wu is with the National Consumer Law Center. She says strong buyer protections are part of what makes credit cards so appealing, and they could help buy now, pay later reach new customers.
Older consumers, such as myself, a Gen Xer, might feel more comfortable using them.
And maybe even replace borrowers shut out by stricter rules. I'm Savannah Marr for Marketplace.
Two seemingly contradictory things can be at the same time true. Thing one, pandemic is over. Thing two, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, 7% of all the adults in this economy, that is 17 million people, said in March of this year that they've got long COVID. There are huge lifestyle challenges that go with that, of course, and there are huge workplace challenges too for employer and employee, as Marketplace's Samantha Fields reports.
Before Brenda Curry got COVID, work was a huge part of her identity. She had 2 jobs, one as a hotel concierge in Portland, Oregon, and another as a kids ski coach.
And that was my life and my livelihood.
But in March of 2020, as the world was shutting down, she got sick, and she never fully recovered. Months later,
I was having severe issues with my eyes and my cognition. There was a disconnect between my brain and my eyes, and there still is.
She would get dizzy when she stood up. She had intense fatigue. She couldn't read or watch movies. And she realized she couldn't work, at least not like she had before.
I was having a hard time. And like I said, my career was so important to me. I was at a complete loss.
Curry's experience sounds familiar to Beth Pollock. She's a research scientist at MIT who's studying long COVID.
What you hear often is a story of loss. And one of the losses that really impacts people both personally in their lives and professionally and financially is that too often they've had to lose their careers.
For some people, she says, long COVID is so severe that they really can't work. But for many others,
what they really need is the right accommodations so that they are able to continue to work.
Long COVID can be considered a disability under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which means people who have it are legally protected from discrimination and have a right to request reasonable accommodations at work. Katie Brennan at the Society for Human Resource Management says that might mean taking extra leave or
things like telework, flex scheduling, extra rest breaks. It really is dependent on the particular disability and an employee's limitations.
Employers are required to make reasonable accommodations for people with qualifying medical conditions, as long as it doesn't pose an undue burden on them.
In most cases, an employer is going to approve an accommodation.
If a disability or illness isn't visibly obvious, which is often the case with long COVID, employers can request documentation from a doctor. But many doctors don't know much about long COVID or take it seriously, and those that do are in high demand, like Dr. Monica Verduzco Gutierrez. She directs the long COVID clinic at UT Health San Antonio.
Some patients, I will see them maybe it's a year after they've been dealing with COVID, and then the waiting list to get into clinic can be several months.
Many who find their way to her have struggled to find the right care or support.
I think there's challenges because still there's not a lot of clarity in the diagnosis.
There's no test or biomarker yet that shows long COVID, and Verduzco Gutierrez says partly because of that,
some clinicians may not be even comfortable writing for accommodations,
which can stand in the way of people getting the support they need at work. Beth Pollock at MIT recently co-authored a piece for the Harvard Business Review called Long COVID at Work, A Manager's Guide. And she says in researching it,
we heard many stories from people losing their careers to people being able to not only keep working, but also be promoted and really thrive in their careers.
The difference, she says, was whether they were able to get the accommodations they needed. For Brenda Curry in Portland, it took a while to find a job she could do. The first couple of jobs she tried in customer service ended up being too much. She quit without ever telling anyone she has long COVID.
Because it's invisible, and I felt like it would work against me.
Eventually, when she was ready to try working again, she applied for a part-time job at a new retail store opening in town.
And it was very clear from the beginning that I was really struggling. And I had to sit down with my manager and say, I have long COVID and I've been very sick.
Her manager has worked around her limitations, scheduling her for shorter shifts and telling her that anytime she needs to take a break, she can.
Being back at work and being part of the economy and also being out in the community and helping people, it's really powerful.
It still takes all of her energy to work just 15 hours a week, but Curry says she's grateful to be able to do it. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out today, a little bit of politics of this economy and some economic trivia all in one. The White House said today it's going to release 1 million barrels of gasoline from the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve. In other news, we've got a Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve. Congress apparently set it up in 2014 after Superstorm Sandy hit New York. Congress also said it's got to be shut down by the end of this fiscal year, and this release will just about take care of that. The politics of this economy go like this. The Biden administration obviously now gets to say it's doing what it can to control pump prices. The economic trivia is that 1 million barrels comes to 42 million gallons. Oil and gas barrels are only 42 gallons apiece. Our media production team includes Brian Allison, Jake Cherry, Jessen Dueller, Drew Jostad, Gary O'Keefe, Charlton Thorpe, Juan Carlos Tirado, and Becca Weinman. Jeff Peters is the manager of media production, and I'm Kai Risdall. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.